Hello and welcome to Feedback. This is episode 33, and today we're joined by composer Wang Lu, who is a composition professor at Brown University, and also Melissa Smey, who is the executive director of Miller's Theater and also an associate dean at Columbia University. Thank you for joining us today. And so for today's episode, we're going to talk about Wang Lu's piece for Young Wire from 2019 called Aaaparatus. So for those of you who are watching, please, you can send in your questions ahead of time to feedback@youngwire.org or join the live chat on YouTube or Facebook to submit your question, and we will try to answer those questions in real time as we can. And so we're so excited to talk to you both about Wang Lu's piece. And with that, Melissa, please.
Thanks, Ning. Hi, everybody. Hello, Lou.
Hey.
Hello.
Nice to be here with all of you. Very fun to see everyone. Excited to do this chat. So let's go ahead and jump right in. Lou, let's start at the beginning. How did you come to know Yarn Wire?
Yeah, I think it's 2006. I came to New York to study from the Beijing Central Conservatory in 2005 at Columbia University. 2006, I heard Young Wire for the first time at Terry Institute for a concert. And I was 23. I never heard any combination or that kind of music. So it was very sharp and shocking and very exciting. And also I had a question was like, what else can they play? I was searching in my head of the repertoire. I know, are they a one-time thing or they're gonna keep going? But it was really, really powerful and impressive. Yeah.
Nice. And so at that point, you probably didn't know any of the individual musicians. Is that true?
No, I didn't know any of them. Yeah. And that's the first maybe one hand, maybe or two hands of the concerts I've ever attended in New York. Yeah.
Oh, that's really nice.
Yeah.
Well, so then how do you get from there? So that's 2005, 2006 when you started the doctoral program at Columbia. And then the kind of landing point of the trajectory that we're going to talk about today is kind of 2018, 2019, when we all worked together to co-commission you to write a piece for Yarn Wire. How did you go from hearing them for the first time, kind of blown away by the instrumentation and wondering about them? How did you travel from that to knowing them so well that we all built a composer portrait together?
Yeah. So I got to know each one of them from different contexts. They each also play with other ensembles too. So I hear Young Wire's concerts in New York and also their albums. And also, like, for instance, Ian plays with Wedding a lot, and Ning plays with Counter Induction, and Russell with other groups. And Laura and I, in the past maybe 4 years ago, I went to Austria together with ICE. So they're such a strong ensemble, but also they are also often being stolen away by other groups. So I feel like I've seen them a lot to get to know what they play, and how they play. And particularly, after you started studying more new music, and the music you're going to hear, then you can really see what the musicians do beyond the score. Sometimes the pieces they play, if I look at the score, there's nothing going on. But if you watch them play, there's so much. It's so enriching. It's like, everything, the groove they add and the expression and how they push and pull with the rhythm and everything. And sometimes the piece is like impossible. I remember Neil was visiting my composition class at Brown a couple years ago when they were rehearsing Aaaparatus' new piece. I just look at the parts, I'm like, wow, that's impossible. Then I heard the recording, I'm like, yes, this is totally meticulously, very, like elegantly executed, and it's totally calm and under control, which is like, well, if you look at the score, so I'm very amazed by the spectrum of abilities, yeah, and the expressions, yeah.
Yeah. And I mean, they're lovely people to work with.
Yeah, absolutely, yeah. That's really important because, like, as a composer, I mean, I'm trained as a pianist. So when I write for anything else, even for piano, I also become self-conscious, like, oh, what do I know anything? Every time when I have a percussionist coming to my orchestration class to demonstrate, what can you do? What can you write for percussion? I feel like, oh, I don't know anything, or I don't know precisely anything, or maybe I know that or not that. So working with people who are generous and not judgmental is very important. So you don't constantly have to apologize for the stupidity. So you just can go ahead and say, okay, this is the sound, and let's try. And they won't be like, oh, you don't know that, and you are teaching? What are you teaching? Like, you've been doing this forever? Like, I never had such a concern, working with them. So
yeah. Well, there's a life lesson there too, right? I mean,
yeah.
not just for composition, work with people who are generous and kind, and you'll find yourself in a good place. So
Yeah.
not just for musical collaborations, but life lesson there.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah. Okay. So let's dive into the piece, and I want you to try to think back to the extent that you can. So this co-commission, right? You get a commission from the Kusavitsky Music Foundation, and then a composer portrait from Miller Theater.
And thank you for the trust.
Oh.
Yeah, I've been going to so many theater composer portraits concerts. Yeah, I really love them. Yeah. And
Me too.
Generous student discounts, so we all go.
Indeed, yes. Yeah, no,
yeah.
It's funny. So I have this wish list, and I was listening to one of your episodes with I think with Zasha DeCastri, and you guys talked a little bit about like the list. And what's fun about it, in a perfect world, every composer could have a composer portrait of their music, right? And
Yep.
it would be presented with the thought and care that we put into the portrait concerts at Miller Theater. And so I have a wish list, and I tend to work pretty closely with ensembles over time. And so the ensembles always have a wish list. And so, Lou, I don't know if you know this, but your portrait was one of the unique ones where there was more than one ensemble that wanted to do a portrait of your music. So it was fun. Yeah, that the International Contemporary Ensemble and Yarn Wire, wanted to work together on this portrait. And so you have a commission to make a piece for Yarn Wire. And I would love it to the extent that you can kind of jump in a time machine and tell us about what you were thinking about at the beginning of that process. Is it excitement? Is it daunting? Can you take us back and tell us what it's like when you were starting this new piece?
Thank you. Yeah. So that I just suddenly thought about the day we were taking the portraits, those beautiful portraits taken on Columbia campus, really, really heartwarming places. That's the first place I've arrived to outside of China, and really changed my life. I got to meet all of you. It's all related to that. So that was in, I think it was spring 2018. And I was 4 months pregnant, we were calling that, and then started to think about the project and working, and I had a baby, and then keep working, and then brought the baby back from Berlin, the residency, to the Miller Theater. Basically, the whole crew has been so accommodating with all this surplus. I'm very grateful for that. So the process is interesting because I had this idea already for a long time, just didn't have a chance to write. Is the factory workers, the peasant workers, precisely, because with a family connection, my mother's side grandmother, who basically I grew up with, going to kindergarten with her and going to visit her every day, and all her siblings were factory workers outside of my hometown Xi'an, the textile factory, and they all got laid off in the 90s at the latest. So I suddenly had I know them as people, I know their children. I just want to know what it's like to work in a factory. And also my mom and my aunt, they were all born in the 50s and they were both working in a textile factory during the Cultural Revolution. And they talk about that time, how sleep deprived and how they have to be very careful, on the machine, and how they wonder one day if this will be over or not. They were teenagers. So we went to visit the factory, the modern factory. I didn't expect it.
Yeah.
And then the sound was amazing. And was also during the same time I read about peasant workers' poems. Then So Miller Theater's commission came. I thought this is the project, but it's a very heavy subject. It's to reflect on, our relationship with mass-produced capitalist, market, and my relationship with the society in different levels, right? So we sit together for Chinese New Year in a big family, but there are people who are laid off, and people who are doing this, and people who are doing that. And what is the connection, and why is it interesting to me, to begin with? I just question that. And it's a challenging time, of course. Myself, never worked in a factory, very privileged, the only child, and played the piano growing up in the city. I was sleep deprived because I've to nurse the baby and do things. But also I think it's very interesting because before I had this kid, I had a commission. So I imagined what the kid would be like. Oh, the kid was making this lovely noise and calling mommy and daddy. I actually made a choral piece for New York virtuoso singers. Now I listen to that piece, I'm like, how naive was I? Oh, we have the real thing. And it's not only the work and all the love and all that, but also it just makes me constantly think about life and death. Not like in the way it's like, oh, existential crisis, but I do think about these things. And with this piece and this subject matter, I'm just thinking about all the noise, what it means if your grandparents work in the factory, your parents work in the factory, you work in the factory, your children will be working in the factory, what it means suddenly it's cut off, and how does it impact one, and how, precious or priceless life is, and reading the poems. So that's the genesis of the piece. Yeah.
How much time had elapsed from the time when your mother and her siblings were working in the factory to when you visited and it was the surprise of complete and total automation? I don't remember how much time had elapsed between those two events.
Yeah, I visited the factory say 4 or 5 summers ago. But my mom and her siblings worked there during the Cultural Revolution in the 60s.
Okay.
And her aunts and uncles worked there was around that time and later too. Yeah. So, and my mom had a cousin who I call a little aunt who also worked there, and she's not too much older than myself. She didn't go to college. And it's a very interesting story because I was a conservatory prep school student playing the piano and writing music. And she also loves music, but she has no access. So but she really couldn't work in the factory anymore. It's, it's called the 3 shifts, right? Every 8 hours, and every 8 hours, day, nights are altered. So she said, oh, I heard there's a job opening in the kindergarten attached to the factory. If I could play the piano, I might be able to get that job. So she has no piano and she has no experience. I was 14 at the prep school. So I started teaching her playing the piano. Every week she would take the train and come to see me in the city. And she would learn the piano and find somewhere to practice on I think it's a pipe organ or something. And then I taught her so well. I'm so proud. I was my first student. And she actually got selected, she actually got the job.
Amazing.
And her audition piece, I could never have another relationship with the piece. She went from nothing to play the Bach two-part invention in F major.
Wow.
Bum, 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 bum. And when I hear that, I just think, what does it even mean? Somebody's doesn't have to work in the job she doesn't like, and her life is changed. It just by chance we're relatives, and then she had the access. Yeah.
That's beautiful. That's really nice. So I would love to listen to a little bit of the video that you took of the textile factory, because I want us to listen to some of the piece. And as a way to set the scene, I would like to show a little bit of the video that you took in the textile factory, so that people can kind of imagine and see your inspiration or one of your inspirations, and then we'll take a listen to the piece, if that's okay.
Yeah, great. So that would be the Xi'an textile factory video.
Yeah.
Great.
And then actually, can we, if it's possible, can we take a listen to one of the sound excerpts? There's one of the sewing machine that I think is also a kind of interesting way to set the scene for the piece itself.
Yeah.
Yeah, that excerpt is great because it's so evocative, and I think that when you hear it, you can hear the music in it. You can hear the kind of inherent musical possibilities there. And so now let's go ahead and we're going to listen to about the first 3 minutes of Lu's piece, Aaaparatus.
Nice.
You guys remember playing this piece?
Yeah. Wow.
So great. Yeah. And it's fun. It's fun to be able to see the factory and hear those sound excerpts and then see how it's transformed into a finished piece. And so I would love to hear you talk about the process that you used to develop those musical materials and the kind of the process of translating, the idea of a factory and the poetry that inspired you. How do you transform that into music?
Yeah. I think for the process, thank you, Melissa. We have to invite the musicians to talk about the process too.
Sure.
For me, it's the very initial idea is more like a writer, like a novelist or a screenwriter. There are situations.
Mm-hmm.
So there are particular situations that you do not need to hear the entire story or have the entire story. You have the emotion, it touches you. I have many of those situations and somehow have those sounds.
Mm-hmm.
And when you hear the cacophony from the modern factory, if you don't have any human relationship with the history or people, it doesn't do anything. You won't just escape because it's so loud. But when you have that, I was thinking about how the story I heard was their best friends working there. They go to the same public bath, many people together, or go to the dining hall. Their kids grow up in the same place and play. And so all of that, I try to translate. So they're machine-like, turning on and off the machine-like, mechanic, sharp and noisy sound, rhythmic driven. And then there are also later you're going to hear some like bells, like timing, the shifts, and bells of school bells, and bells for, celebration of holidays. Later you're going to hear the bell becomes like jingles and whatever it means. In other factories, when there's Christmas time, the jingles also means the mass production of all kinds of merchandise that circulate around the globe. So people had to be working in a factory in order for us to have gifts to give to children and to give to each other. So that's something I was thinking. But I would like to maybe have Young Wire or our friends talk about when they have the materials, what they think, because it's quite dense. Yeah.
And you had said that you had incorporated some improvisation into the score, which I'll confess I didn't know at the time of the premiere. So when we were talking, last week, that was new. It was a surprise for me. So I would love to hear from Young Wire about that, what that process was like.
Yeah, I didn't know there was improvisation either, but later I was like, wow, they really know what they're doing. It sounds much better than, the precision of the notes.
Yeah.
With this tuplets and the change of meter and the cue and the this and that, So, yeah.
Well, I think knowing your music, Lu, before this was really super helpful. I mean, I know I had played, not just on this concert, but I had played your music before, as you were saying, and I know, Ning and you have a relationship, I think all of us, and we had all heard your music. And I think that actually was tremendously helpful because we know the sort of the colorfulness, the playfulness, the energy, the rhythmic energy that you're able to get. And even I think of, the piece that I played, or even, the very first piece I ever heard of yours, which was on the Mata Festival a while back. And there's always this wonderful, slightly sly, wry humor in everything that you write also. It's so multi-layered and beautifully put together. And I think that definitely gave us a little bit of that confidence, like you were saying, to take the piece and make it our own in a lot of ways. I'm not sure we would have felt maybe necessarily that level of confidence working with a composer we didn't know.
I remember countless texts from you being like, how do I make this sound? And like we were looking for a lot of shakers, and I could go back to like my Amazon cart or something from a very particular time, and there's like tons of shakers. Steve Weiss music, I bought them all out. But like, everything from like a medicine pill box. I think maybe we ended up with that, and like to other little shakers, different types of beans and stuff. I remember just always, trying to find these factory sounds and how do we make them on instruments, by treating the bass drum, getting all this stuff. That was a lot of fun because, it was constantly searching for the right analog to those recordings that you did.
Yeah. Ming, anything that you'd want to add?
Yes, I was talking to Wang Lu, talking about Wang Lu at something completely different to sort of an audience like on Zoom, and so I was talking about my connection to Wang Lu, and one thing I said about our relationship is that when you reference something, like when you reference about the kind of the sort of the trouble that one would go into taking the train to take a lesson with a relative like miles and miles away, it doesn't surprise me at all. Like I can immediately imagine that, and then sort of this situation with the public bath. I feel like because of the common experience we had, there's like a lot of musical expressions that I just understand from your music. And I think your piano writing is so varied and so diverse, and we talked so much about piano writing, right, in the last few years, and then this constant, I feel like this constant push and pull, not really a struggle, but just a constant thinking over writing notes versus writing certain notes to represent an expression, like a sound. I think that's something we talked quite a bit, and how to write less notes but with more expression, with more like effectiveness, kind of, so that is something I think I see that you experiment with this piece, that it's very dense, but at the same time with a lot of freedom on the other hand. Yeah.
So I'm curious then,
Yeah.
as a follow-up for Yarnwire, I'm curious, does the experience of knowing the backstory of Lu's influences and the kind of inspiration that she had for the piece, are there ways in which it feels that you're almost inhabiting a character, or kind of it's not a programmatic work, but it has a story to tell? Do you feel like you're inhabiting a character? Is there any of that when you're performing these parts, you're playing this music, but do you feel like you're embodying the inspiration at the same time?
I'd say in some of the sounds in this piece, it was clear what the sound was evoking in some way, like the factory sounds or the bell sounds. But there's also something kind of nicely mysterious about Lu's writing in that in many pieces I think we've all played, almost everything that we play, I think we might intuitively understand what role it's inhabiting, whether it's like a texture, a melodic line, some like structural point. And I think the mystery in this piece and in a lot of Lu's music is that, or at least for me, there's a lot of it that I don't understand or I don't grasp. And so there's also like a level of trust, like I need to just do this thing. So I think from my experience, this was a split of inhabiting one kind of material evocative of the factory sounds, but another one that I just kind of wasn't sure what the logic was behind it, but that there must be some logic behind it. So
do you have the sense that that might change over time? Is it the kind of thing where your feeling about it might evolve, like in successive performances of the piece? Do you think that might evolve?
Probably.
Yeah.
Oh yeah,
Yeah.
for sure.
Yeah, I remember the opening of the piece. I specified some kind of brush and soft mallet, and of course I remember Russell told me don't say soft or hard, just describe the sound. And then Ian was like, okay, this brush and this mallet, I can never forget, on the bass drum is a vegetable brush. And I told him, should I write down vegetable brush for the next performance? And really got the sound of like somebody heavy-footed walking. And the image I was thinking was from one of the poems talking about how a peasant worker moving to the city with a sack of his belongings and leaving the city with his own torso, basically poetic, very, very
Whoa.
heavy and sad. And I was thinking, we're not peasant workers, but I grew up living in a city that's built by them. But each one of us here goes through life in some ways, carry our own old self, we have to keep going. So this moving forward, but heaviness, but it's not something I could translate into pitches. I just had an intuition that it is not something, but it's an empathy. It's a common experience, as Ning is saying. You don't have to be a peasant, you don't have to be a worker, you can be at Columbia University. But you still could go through life and bundle yourself up and then keep moving. And I was thinking about that, but they really helped me find the sound after I told them the story. Yeah,
that's really beautiful. Well, so maybe it's a good time for us to listen to our second excerpt, which is about in the middle of the piece. Let's go ahead.
Maybe go from just like 10 minutes, 23 seconds or so into 12.
Exactly right.
Right.
Love
Thank
it.
you.
Love
That
it.
sound.
Thank you.
That
So
sound.
great. So let's hear about a little bit. So we were talking a little about brushes and the idea, Russell said, don't tell us the brush, tell us the sound. So what are some of the decisions that you had to make to orchestrate this piece for an ensemble of 2 percussionists and 2 pianists? And some of them, it seems like some of them were collaborative decisions. So I'll open up that first for Lou and then for everybody.
Yeah, so I started playing the piano since when I was 5. So whenever I write for piano, I was like, oh, if I sit at the piano, improvise, things will come out from what's already deep inside of me, right? So for this piece, since I have this project, so I purposely use the piano in different ways, as you know, not in the romantic, quote unquote romantic, or the direct enjoyable way, because I was thinking as you can see from the video, each one of them is kind of like forcefully attached to kind of an invisible machine. They're so busy, they're playing so intensely, they have to coordinate. What's missing there is they don't have time to care for themselves.
Mm-hmm.
They don't have the care. So this harshness, I want this to come through. In the writing, the repetition is very dull, right? On the assembly line, you repeat the same action. That's what drives people crazy. And for pianists, it's beautiful harmony and everything. You can't do that. You just have to play. And I was imagining in some other parts of the piece that actually people I know who work on the assembly lines would have an accident and lose their fingers, and then what kind of clusters would that be? And I actually wrote precise clusters, and at the rehearsal, we realized those are really hard to play, and it really discounted the message itself. So we adjust a lot of those, and to think about just the gesture and shape, and what drives the piece.
Yeah. And you had mentioned that your piano writing in this piece was treating the piano more like a percussion instrument. And I think that you mentioned that maybe is a little bit different from other pieces that you had done. Is that right?
Right. So I care about notes. So I think about harmony. And in this piece, I still do. But overall, there's a lot of noise, and the action is more important. Yeah. And they, as an ensemble, Young Wire is really striking, not only performing as something you listen to it, but also something you watch.
That's right.
The choreography. Yeah. They changed my electronic cues from piano to percussion, just, very, very gracefully. So you don't see this person's trying to reach out and do this extra thing. And so I'll choreograph as part of the overall piece. That also affected the decision making. Yeah.
Also, I'm curious then for Yarn Wire, the time. So when we have a composer portrait at Miller, we have some time the week of the performance to work together, and to be on the stage with with each other and with the composer. And I'm curious if there were any other insights during that week of time together. So you mentioned that the clusters were a challenge, and it sounds like maybe the choreography of the electronics got changed. Were there any other insights from that week of preparing the piece? If you can remember back, it feels like a lifetime ago, but if you can remember back to February of 2019, were there any insights from that week of working together?
I don't remember any specific things. Maybe one of you all can, but actually the whole piece came together that week. So if I can remember correctly, we didn't really even have a sense of it before that. We had the parts, we kind of we're looking at it, but everything from the electronics to these clusters to my instruments, my aforementioned shakers, but also, what drums we were using, everything really got shaped in that week, because there's only so much you can put on the page, and you practice it and you're like, okay, yeah. But then once we're in the space together with Lu, trying things and just, adjusting, that's when it took shape. And actually I should look back at my music and see what kind of notes there are, because there's probably a bunch of information in there that we should have. So things got really shaped then. I don't even remember if we made cuts. It's possible, things changed. I just remember it was very fluid, and our rehearsals were about really putting it together from the ground up. So that was great. It's amazing to have that time, actually.
Nice. Okay. We have about 15 minutes left in our time. So maybe what we can do, let's just jump into our final excerpt. We're going to listen to the final few minutes of the piece. So we'll start about 18 and a half minutes and we'll listen to the end. Good. So I understand that we have a question from the audience, and I thought we could take that before we jump back into some follow-up on that excerpt we just saw.
Oh, yeah, absolutely. So this question comes from Marcel, who asks, given the densely charged nature of the sound, how did you performers navigate this difficult, perhaps, balance between oppressive machine noise and the intimate beauty of Wang Lu's writing?
Rehearsal.
Yeah.
No, I mean,
I think a
it's,
lot of it was written into the part. I
Yeah.
guess, right?
Yeah.
Like it was clear just notationally which was which often, at least for Russell and I, and that might be partially due to instrumentation.
Yeah, totally. And also having ears in the audience helping us shape it. Like that's one of the trickiest things with new music. Especially stuff that's this dense and new. Like, am I playing too loud? Is our balance good? And having the composer there to give you that that commentary is really helpful. So I mean, Lou helped us balance for sure. And but then, as you're rehearsing throughout the week, you're kind of self-assessing and learning the music and seeing, where you can go with it.
Yeah.
I don't know the piano parts.
I was thinking actually about Melissa's earlier question that Ian answered about like character, and it's like, there are all these different sort of little motives and ideas that reoccur throughout the piece, and each has a very specific character or energy. And I think that is, again, that's something that Wang Lu is really good at, is giving you a sense immediately of this character or energy in a musical sense, maybe not in a literal sense, but and I think that actually is really clear throughout the piece, and that's something that maybe I don't have to make a decision about so much. She has done the right work ahead of time.
I totally agree with Laura. Just looking at the scores, trying to remember what we did with the piece, and each of us had such different parts. Like it's such different sort of machineries putting together. Sort of like we each did a different job, and given different colors to this big machine. And I think just our like colors and timbres were so different, so balancing. We could always sort of hear each other very clearly through each of our sounds, I think.
Yeah, they definitely, all of them have fantastic ears. So subtle things like very important resonance, right? Especially Melissa can share with us in the particular space of Miller Theater, right? She's very generous to have us there for a week. There's a reason, right? So they can control how much pedal or when to stop things from vibrating. That really changes things, right? When you have very dense and busy textures, which layer do you want to be heard, right? And really also you're hearing the space. So they're really fantastically adjusting to the space.
Well, so I'm curious, the video, the last excerpt that we just heard features incredibly virtuosic piano playing by Laura and Ning. And so my question for the two of you is, how is it to be, when you're performing a piece that was written by a composer who trained as a pianist, what is that like?
Yeah, before they answer, maybe I can say, trained as a pianist for years, but written as if she's never written for piano.
I don't know about that. I think that's incredibly
unfair.
Virtuosic writing. So I'm curious from your perspective as the two pianists in the ensemble, what is that like?
It's
Laura, you
equally
want to answer this
daunting.
first?
Yeah, I will. I was just going to say, it's always, I think everybody is sort of eyeballing each other nervously. Like the composer wonders if they've done a good job, so the pianist doesn't think poorly of them, and the pianist wonders if they're doing a good enough job that the composer is, not disappointed in their abilities as a musician. So I think, I don't know why, I think maybe piano tends to lend itself in particular to those sorts of deep-seated insecurities. It's such a laden instrument, but with Wang Lu in particular, knowing how gracious she is as a colleague and somebody that you are collaborating with, I think I didn't necessarily have that. I wasn't afraid, and she shouldn't be either.
Nice.
Yeah.
Well, please.
Sorry, I just want to add, like, I think Wang Lu's piano writing is really sophisticated and beautiful. And also, I just want to say that again, like, it's so varied, from her other piano pieces or piano parts from other ensemble pieces. It just, the writing so diverse, so she can write this extremely noisy, like really crazy virtuosic cluster chords, but she can also write a really beautiful melody, melodic line with beautiful harmony. So, I see that, but all in all, I think it's very pianistic. That shows that she's a pianist, like really pianistic, and no matter how hard it is, it's really playable.
Yeah, that's beautiful. Lu, before we wrap up, are there any final thoughts that you would like to share? Anything that you hoped that I would ask, but I didn't, or any final observations you'd like to share?
Yeah, thank you so much. I was just thinking, this is way pre-COVID. Feels like an ages ago, and
Yeah.
the best thing came out of the portrait concert. Thank you, Melissa.
It's an
Is
honor.
that when we think about the portraits, like to have your music written over 10 years ago, heard in the same night with something you're gonna hear, for the first time. It's really one of a kind of an opportunity, right? It's like seeing your photo albums or reading your own diary and trying to make sense of who you are, and from the 2-year-old to the 12-year-old, maybe to today, what are still there, composes who you are, and what are gone. Do you miss those parts in terms of creative work and personality? I am very grateful for this opportunity, and since this work, I started to explore relationship with musicians and invite them much earlier on into the creative process. So the work I did in Berlin with Ensemble Mosaic was ensemble pieces with interludes for soloists improvising. So we have Uwe and Ryan Muncy playing improvisations to bridge them. And then the most recent work with the Seattle Modern Orchestra is a guided improvisation. To each page it has, pitches, gestures, and overall timing, but then we go to a direction and we try to give a common experience, as Neil was saying. This time the common experience is that we all went to the conservatory. What is like to hear in different practice rooms, different instruments and repertoires, or playing the same actor for the same audition. It's like, or like a fake practice, as if you're practicing, but you play so well. That's not real practice, So I always find like a common experience for, to connect with, with myself and with the musician. So this is really an important work. And from the ensemble and from Melissa, I never felt like I had to write the best piece. So I really took a risk. So I was not afraid, they're never going to play you again, because this is not what they expected. It's really very open. So this would make me do whatever I wanted to do in the moment, which is, on the way to something else as well. So yeah, thank you all for that.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you for sharing that, Wang Lu. I think with that, we'll close today's episode. And thank you both, Melissa and Wang Lu, for being here and talking to us. Our next episode is going to be on December 17th for a talk with composer Andrew McIntosh and also Will Robin. So please subscribe to our channel so you don't miss an episode. And to support this project, please visit our page on patreon.com, where you can become a patron and receive cool bonus and rewards. And then just want to say one final thing. We are Yarnwire. We're in the midst of our 2021 fundraising campaign, and any amount that you're able to give as support, not just for the feedback series, but also all of our other important programs, such as the Yarnwire International Institute and Festival, and our Yarnwire current missions, we would really appreciate it. Please visit yarnwire.org to donate. Thank you so much. Thank you all for watching. See you next time.
Thank you.
Thank you. Bye.